Here, look at this. On Tuesday, I had an awful day with this exception of this one guy I saw. Go to the next slide. Then while I was shopping, I ran into this bully who worked there. Okay, it's kind of a little story. You kind of get the gist of what's going on in the story. You know, someone had a terrible day. They had an awful day, with the exception of a person that they got a chance to meet. And then they ran into a mean, forceful person who that worked in a store they were in. Okay, you get the gist of it, right? But words, did you know that words can be funny things? They can be interesting because depending on the time that they came from, the way that they're used, the time that they're used, the country that they're used, the culture that they're used in, they can have completely different meanings. For instance, let's go back to the first slide. Lily, if you don't mind. On Tuesday, I had an awful day. Did you know that originally the word awful had a positive implication? As in filled with awe. Something was so amazing that you were filled with awe. But now, like you go to somebody and say, hey, how was that movie? And they say, oh, it was awful. What does that mean? That's terrible. I thought, don't waste your time with that. It was horrible. Don't go see it. Awful. But originally, it was a positive word, which actually kind of makes sense. Okay, but then look at this. On Tuesday, I had an awful day with the exception of this one guy I saw. Now, did you know that in England, formerly the term guy was a slang term for someone with grotesque appearance? It goes back to Guy Fawkes' day when they used to burn these images of Guy Fawkes and who tried to burn down Parliament. And the images and the little statues would be all molded and look gross, so it was slang for grotesque appearance. But, for us, guy means, or guys means a man or a group of men. But if you were in England at some point, and who knows when, and you called somebody a guy, they'd be like, hey, that's not very nice. You're calling me saying I have grotesque appearance. That's not very nice, right? That's not nice at all. Okay, and finally, the next slide. How about the word bully? Did you know that the word bully originally was a term for like a buddy, a friend, a chap? It's someone that, was a good friend. That's my bully. That's my bully. Somewhere around the 16th century, that was when the word was originated. Hey, that's my bully. Me and my bully going to hang out. And you're like, oh, okay. But somewhere in the 17th or 18th century, it became what we know now as a bully, which is someone who uses force and mean-spiritedness to get their way, right? But now look at these words, this word awful, this word guy, and this word bully. If we take now what we just learned about those three words and we insert those meanings into our phrase, it changes it up a little bit, right? Lily, pop up the new meanings if you don't mind. Do you have it? Okay, you don't. Well, there we go then. Then I'll read it to you. How about if I read it to you and say, on Tuesday, I had an awe-inspiring day, with the exception of this one grotesque-looking man I saw. Next slide. Then while I was shopping, I ran into this gallant and valiant friend who worked there. Changed the meaning of our little paragraph a little bit, didn't it? Almost 180 degrees, almost the exact opposite of what we thought it meant before. Now it means something completely different, right? You see, words matter. Words are important. The way they're used, the time they're used, it all matters. And see, this becomes problematic when you're dealing with a faith like ours that studies and follows a book that was written between 2,000 and 4,000 years ago. And not only that, you're dealing with a book that was translated into our language just about 400 years ago. And not only that, you're dealing with a book that majority of it was written in Hebrew, then translated to Greek, then translated to Latin, and then to English, or from Greek to English. Definitely the possibility of something being lost in translation, right? I mean, is that definitely the possibility of something being lost in translation? So you get this situation where how do you know necessarily if something doesn't really make sense? How do you know what to do with it? Or how do you find out the meaning? You obviously can study and you can go back into the meanings of the words, but still there's cultural concepts that are included that you don't fully understand. So you get this, you have to use sometimes this thing that they teach you early in school. You know, when you're reading, the girls here probably know about this, when you're reading a word and you don't know what it means, your teacher will tell you context clues, right? Look for the word and figure out the context of the way it's being used, and then you can gain a greater understanding of it, okay? For instance, let's take that word awful that we looked at. Let's say that I have my understanding of the word awful, which means terrible, but someone else has their meaning means filled with awe. How would I know the way that they're using the word? So if I say, hey, how was that movie? And they say, it was awful. Well, I'm going to go, it wasn't very good. But if I keep listening, they may say, it was awful. The action sequences were incredible. The acting was unbelievable. I would go see it again in a heartbeat. At that moment, you have a Princess Bride moment where you're like, you keep using that word. I do not think it means what you think it means. And you realize that maybe your understanding of what they're saying isn't fully in line culturally or contextually with what they're saying. That's why we are so big here at Renaissance Fellowship about text and context. Not to just read a text out of the Bible without understanding the greater context of where it's coming from and what it means. Who's saying it? Why are they saying it? Who are they saying it to? All of these things are important. And then even within that, looking at it within the confines of the greater knowledge and awareness of the Bible as a whole and the life and the message of Jesus. So that way you don't just take something out of context and use it for cultural significance today that it may not have meant that same thing 2,000 years ago. Does that make sense? So text and context, very important. Now the reason I talk about that whole thing is because we're going to be dealing with tonight a very tricky word, okay? Now, we're in the middle of this series called Attitude Adjustment, and we're looking at the Sermon on the Mount. Specifically, we're looking at the Beatitudes in Matthew, the 5th chapter. Now, every week we've said it, the Beatitudes. A beatitude is an attitude you should be. Say it, a beatitude is an attitude you should be. See, then that's easy, so easy to remember. Now, the first week we looked at blessed are the poor in spirit, and of course, that's one that could certainly get twisted and turned based upon your cultural perspective or the way that you look at it. But this week, we've got an interesting one. We're going to be in Matthew, the 5th chapter, verse number 5, and we're going to have some fun with this tonight. Matthew 5, verse number 5, Jesus says this. He said, blessed are the meek. Meek. Now that's an interesting word. Can we be honest? Let's be honest in church. Is it all right if we're honest in church? Let's not try to be super spiritual. Let's be honest. Nobody wants to be meek. Okay, if I were to give you a piece of paper and a pencil and you were to write down 10 attributes that you would like to have in yourself, 10 attributes that you would like other people to describe you as, I dare say that no one in this room tonight would put down the word meek as one of their attributes. Yeah, strong, yes. Honest, absolutely. Intelligent, attractive, Powerball winner. These would all be things that we would love to have used to describe us. But meek, who wants to be meek? I did a quick a Google search for definition of meek. Simplest search I could think of. And it popped up this definition. I think we've got it up on the slide. It says meek. Okay, now look at this. It's an adjective. And look at it. It says quiet, gentle. That's all right. Gentle's all right. But easily imposed on. Submissive. And now look at the sample sentence. I used to call her Miss Mouse because she was so meek and mild. Oh, that does not sound like something I want to describe me. Now look at some of these other synonyms. Submissive, yielding, obedient, compliant, tame, biddable, tractable, acquiescent, deferential, timid, unprotesting, unresisting. Wow. These are not words that I want to use to describe. Does anybody want these to be descriptions of who you are as a person? No, this is not an attractive situation. This is not like, hey, you know what I want to be? I want to be acquiescent. I want to be biddable. I want to be timid and unprotesting. That's how I want to be in life. So no wonder people are like, blessed are the meek. I don't know about that. So here's the question. is this idea of being meek so virtuous and so holy that our evil human selves can't wrap our minds around it, and that's why we have trouble with it? Or is maybe our cultural interpretation and what Google says not the same as what Jesus meant? I think probably by the way I phrased that question, I probably gave away what my feeling on it is. That was kind of a leading question, wasn't it? Here, what do you want? Ice cream or dirt? That's kind of the way I phrased that one. But that's okay. It's, I can do that. Here's and also, you just look at this. This is not what we want to be. So here's the question. I think you know what I want, but I don't think that Jesus would ever command us to do something or to be something that would hinder us or make it detrimental for us as human beings to grow and have relationships and love our neighbors and be the people that he's called us to be in every other part of his ministry, right? I don't see that. And the difficulty is in America, in our culture in the 21st century, meekness is weakness. Meekness is weakness. There's no two ways to get around it. You describe being meek to someone, and they see it as being weak. And I don't know about you, but when I read the Bible, I look at Jesus, I look at his message, it is anything but weak. It is anything but timid. It is powerful. It is strong. So there's got to be a disconnect between our interpretation of what this is and what Jesus intended for us to be. Does that make sense? Okay, the thing I really want us to make clear before we go any further about our concept of meekness is that this imposed upon weakness that we view as being meek is not what Jesus is talking about, okay? There is something huge lost in translation here that just does not come across. The original word that Jesus used when he was talking about this was a word called praos. It's a Greek word that we really don't have a word in English that means the same thing. Okay, the closest is meek, but the root word is very difficult to translate into English because it has this underlying tone or this underlying implication of strength with the gentleness. But we don't think of strength when we think of meekness. We just think of being imposed upon and being weak. But the original word that Jesus had has this concept of exercising strength under control, demonstrating power without undue force. You see, now I don't know about you, but those are some ideas that I can get behind. See, the English term meek often lacks that blending of gentleness and strength. Gentleness and strength. Now that sounds a little bit more like Jesus, doesn't it? That sounds a little bit more like something he would talk about. That sounds a little bit more like maybe another phrase that he used called being wise as a serpent, but harmless as a dove. Maybe now we're starting to get a little bit clearer image of what he was talking about when he said, blessed are the meek. But you cannot separate the statement from the promise. We talked about this last week. We love when we quote the Beatitudes. We have this really bad habit of just quoting the first part of it as the virtue that we should be. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are those who mourn. Blessed are the meek. Blessed. And we forget, why are these people blessed? Why are they happy? It's the second half of it that's so important. The blessed are the poor in spirit. They're happy because theirs is the kingdom of heaven. The people who mourn are blessed because they will be comforted. And the people who are meek are blessed because they will inherit the earth. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Inherit. It's an interesting word. Again, words are important. So many words that Jesus could have used, right? Blessed are the meek, for they shall receive the earth. Blessed are the meek, for they shall have the earth. Blessed are the meek, for they shall get the earth. There's so many things that he could have said, but the word inherit implies something really important. You see, you don't inherit anything until something dies. Right? You don't inherit something until something else dies. Now, this is where the promise becomes problematic. Because remember, we're children, right? We're the children of God. Now, what is the one thing that children hate more than anything besides green beans? Maybe that was just my childhood. Does anybody really like green beans? What? There's something wrong with you. Okay. Even worse than the word no, what children hate more than anything, correct me if I'm wrong, is waiting. What was it? It might have been broccoli, but I think they might hate waiting even more than broccoli. Would everyone agree that kids hate to wait? Would you agree that you hate to wait also? Was it Tom Petty, I believe, that said, "Oh, the waiting is the hardest part." Right. See, and by its very nature, inheriting means that you have to wait for something else to die or pass away so that you can inherit or receive what it is that's been promised to you. Right? See, now many scholars, if you read up on this, blessed are the meek, if you read other people's commentaries and things, a lot of people believe that Jesus, when he's talking about this inheriting the earth, that he's talking about a bigger kind of prophetic message about eventually at the end times when the world is over, then the meek or the Christian, the Christ-like people will inherit the earth at that time. And I'm not saying that that is wrong, because frequently Jesus would always give things that meant something now, but also would mean something in the future and ongoing. But I'll tell you that Jesus very rarely, if ever, teaches something that only has a future ramification. He always had a now purpose in it also. There was always a practical now. And I think that we also see this because Jesus doesn't say, "Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit eternal life," or "Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit heaven." He says, "Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth," like here, like terra firma, like where we live, this place that we live on now. So there has to be a practical portion to what he's talking about. So what are we inheriting? What is this earth that we're inheriting? You see, I think one thing that probably everybody in this room has in common tonight is that I think we've probably all experienced injustice in some way, shape, or form. Something that wasn't fair. Something that shouldn't have been the way we thought it should have been. We've all been exposed to unfairness in our life. I mean, it's kind of the mantra of childhood, isn't it? It's one of the first things that we notice when we're kids. It's like, he got a sucker, and I didn't get a sucker. That's not fair. Right? We notice it immediately. We see they got one, and they didn't get one, but that's not fair. It's something in us that we see this. How many people, have you ever been in a job and you've seen somebody promoted that didn't deserve it? How many, do you have to point if that person's here, but just, have you ever seen it? Have you ever been passed up? Have you ever seen someone that you knew deserved it, did the work, put in the time, and they were passed up because somebody played golf with somebody or somebody was related to somebody? And there's something in you that just goes, that's not fair. I think we've all seen power abused, haven't you? Seen someone who was in a position of power, and they used that power to either hurt or misused it just for their own gain. Have you ever witnessed that? Have you ever been on the losing end of that? Have you ever seen someone abused, taken advantage of? I don't know, I have. And I think there's something deep in our bones that cries out when we see that injustice, that just says, that's not fair. And I think it's part of the God that's in us, the image of God that we were created in, that yearning for justice, that yearning for the scales to be balanced, for there to be justice. But the one thing that we do not want is to wait for justice. Right? Nobody wants to wait for justice. So what happens? We're tempted to follow through with it, with our own desire, and take justice into our own hands. We don't want to inherit the earth. We don't want to wait for something to pass away so that we can receive our promise. Instead, we want to take it. Vengeance. We want to take what's ours. We want to punish those who've done wrong. We want to take justice into our own hands and make sure that it actually happens for once. We can't just sit by and let this happen. So we take what it is that we feel we deserve. And so this becomes the way of the world. 6 billion people all trying to take what they think they deserve at the same time. And don't get me wrong, it feels good at first, right? Because you're acting on that instinct to, that's not fair. And you throw your hat in the ring, and you do your best, and then what happens? Just bounces back and forth. You get what you got, you take it, and you have it. Until someone stronger comes along and takes it from you. Until someone stronger comes along and takes it from them. And so it goes, on and on. Whoever has the most strength in the moment has the most power. And it ends up looking a little something like this. So, this is the earth. And here's the meek. And let's see what happens. So that's what it looks like. That's what it looks like, the meek inheriting the earth. That's what life looks like. Things are going to be taken from you. I'm sorry. I wish this was a church where I could come and tell you that everything's yours and nothing bad's ever going to happen to you. And if you give a $500 in the offering, then God's going to give you $5,000 this week. But this ain't that church, okay? We're going to tell you the truth. And the truth is that stuff's going to be taken from you. And then what? Then you're faced with a choice. You can fight. You can. You can throw your hat in the ring and see who the strongest is, and the strongest in that moment will prevail, whoever it is, whoever maybe happens to have the baseball bat at that time. But I will warn you that it will satisfy your anger and your outrage in the moment, but it will only last until someone stronger enters the ring. The other option is that you use your gentleness with your strength. Don't run away. Meekness isn't running away. No. It's not running away and hiding. Instead it is letting the other forces in the world beat each other up. And then you wait, and you inherit what they will inevitably leave behind. Tomorrow is Martin Luther King Day, and there's a quote that I love. MLK said, he said that the arc of the universe is long, but it always curves towards justice. You see, our problem is that we have God on a stopwatch. See, when something is taken from us, we're sitting there and we start the stopwatch and we start going, hey, God, it's been 42.7 seconds. How come you haven't made this right yet? Hey, God, it's been 5.7 minutes. Why haven't you got, hey, God, it's been a month. What are you doing? Are you dead? Are you indifferent? Do you not care? What are you doing? Hey, stopwatch is going. And that's the problem. I remember Angie and I, we went to Europe. We saved up all the money, went on this trip to Europe. We were excited. We went to Rome. If you ever can, go to Rome. It's everything you ever hoped it would be and more. And one of the days we went and looked at all the old ruins, okay? We looked at the Colosseum and we went to the Forum, okay? I remember being in the Forum and there was this stack of rocks there. And there was a sign by it that said that this was the spot where Julius Caesar, his body had been burned for his funeral, for his pyre, his funeral. And I'm just, oh my God, this is Julius Caesar's funeral was right here. I was just incredible. And I stepped out and I started looking around and I started to think about this Roman Empire that lived for 1,000 years, okay? Roman Empire, 500 years on the way up, 500 years on the way down, okay? 1,000 years. To put that in perspective, America is 240 years old. Okay, all of American history, everything you read in your books has happened in 240 years. Less than a quarter of the Roman Empire's life is all of American history. Okay, so 1,000 years, generations of people born and died under the flag or the oppression of this Roman Empire. Okay? And then I began to think about 2,000 years ago, right at the height and peak of their power, there was a little baby that was born in a tiny little village, the most humble of beginnings that you can imagine. And this baby began a movement. Now, this movement was not very popular with the Romans. Matter of fact, the Romans were part of the team that got together and had this leader killed. And they persecuted Christians. They fed them to lions. They burned them. They tried to kill them. They tried to wipe them off the face of the earth. But slowly, this little movement, it fed their hungry. And it cared for their sick. And it took the lowest of their society and showed them how to live in dignity and love with one another, no matter where their social standing was. And this little movement over time, over the next 400 years, conquered the Roman Empire to where eventually it became the official faith of the entire empire. This little movement conquered the greatest empire the world had ever known without raising a single sword in coup or in defiance. With strength and gentleness, they conquered an empire. So people will say, Jared, this meek thing, man, now it doesn't work. You got to fight in this world for what you need. You got to stand up for yourself. If you don't fight for yourself, who's going to fight for you, right? That's what people tell you, right? You can't be some weak person just sitting by. You got to get in there. Yeah, you might get bloody, you might get beat up, but at least you're standing up for yourself. That's what our culture tells us. Go for it. Absolutely, if that's what you feel you need to do to satisfy your ego, but if you want lasting change in your life and in our world, it will not be taken by force. It will only be changed by love. And on the eve of Martin Luther King Day, don't look at me and tell me that you can't sit at a lunch counter and not retaliate, that you can't sit on a bus and just stand your ground in gentle strength and change the world, because you can. Because you can. There is evidence in our world. You can look at Gandhi. Just with love and fasting, he vanquished the entire British Empire out of India without raising a single sword or gun in defiance, just with gentleness and strength. I know when we're hurt, we want to fight. We do. But what Jesus is telling us is that blessed are those who are gentle and strong, because they will inherit the earth. You don't have to fight. You have gentleness, strength, and love. And love is the only weapon we have. And it is the only weapon we need. The question is, do you and I have the courage to use it? Do we have the faith to believe that it actually will work? And take our stopwatch off and understand that it might not happen as fast as we want it to happen, but in the end, you reap what you sow. And if you live by the sword, you die by the sword. This is the world that our God created, and he's giving us a hint and a clue how to win in this world. But it's not the way we think we can win. We don't win by fighting. We win by loving. And the meek inherit the earth.